Welcome to the DRF Sports Podcast, brought to you by DRF Sports. America's most trusted name in horse racing is now providing sports bettors with exclusive data, analytics, previews, videos, and expert picks on all major sports. Bet smarter and have more fun doing it. It's the DRF Sports Podcast, and now your host, Sheldon Alexander. Ready, set, bet.
This is the DRF Sports Podcast, episode 22. Make sure you like and follow wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander. And let's be honest, I'm a little fired up after an epic week of picks. As you know, I come in with my leans on Friday, and then I have Matt talk me into finalizing my picks, which I post on social media on Sunday morning. But stumbling into a 12-2 week against the spread, plus on the pod, giving out just straight winners on Friday. So hopefully you tuned into that, and just know that on this pod, we got some NBA picks, we got some MACtion picks for you, midweek football picks, and more. More on that in a second. But first things first, I'd like to introduce everybody to Cash Grab, which is DRF Sports' all-new free-to-play sports prediction game where you can win real money. It's available to every sports fan in the App Store and in the Google Play Store. Win real cash prizes every day, as well as a chance to win big money jackpots. All you have to do is download the free DRF Cash Grab app, create an account, and start predicting. Who will win the first quarter? How many touchdowns will George Kittle score? Answering questions like these can end in you making real money. So download the DRF Cash Grab app now and win big. And hopefully, you know what? We can give you some information on this podcast that will help you win said cash and win big, as we do this twice a week. On Tuesdays, we recap the week that was, and on Fridays, it's the Picks Pod. And if you listen to us on Friday, chances are you hit everything moving on NFL Sunday, including Matt convincing me to have some faith in my Niners on Monday night. And boy, did they come through big with a 31-10 win against the Rams, which ended up bringing home the money line parlay, ended up cashing some other parlays as well. Just a big boy day for us here on the DRF Sports Podcast. So hopefully you've been checking that out, and hopefully you've also been checking out and getting your information from the DRF Sports Sunday Scoop e-newsletter. Because if you haven't done so, make sure you sign up for free at drf.com/sports to receive 2 free weekly newsletters delivered to your email inbox every Friday and Sunday. Both are packed with powerful betting angles you don't want to miss. Again, drf.com/sports for all of the insight and analysis you need every single day to make your picks. Plus, of course, we go in depth on this podcast. We got picks. We also got swag for you. So this promo is still running. So if you want some free DRF swag, head over to our home on Instagram at DRF Sports and enter by liking the giveaway post, following DRF Sports on Instagram, and sharing the post on your story. The winner will be announced Wednesday, November 17th. But before Wednesday, it's Tuesday. And you know what we do on Tuesdays is we give out our NBA Tuesday tip-off picks. So far, I'm 6-3 on the season, and the same rules apply. I'm making these picks early on Tuesday morning. And so you need to make sure that you keep it locked to drf.com/sports for all of the potential line movements and injury updates throughout the day. But as long as the stars are in the lineup, here are my picks. Give me the Nets at home as 2.5-point favorites against the Warriors. Steph and company are in the middle of a tough road trip. And I feel like KD, he's kind of waiting to quiet the early season hype with his former team. Give me the Sixers plus 8.5 on the road in Utah. The Jazz are playing up and down so far to start the season. The Sixers, on the flip side, without Joel Embiid, they're still super scrappy and keeping things close. So the 8.5 points might be a little bit too much. Also, give me the Clippers laying 6.5 points at home against the Spurs. Paul George has been putting in work as of late, while the Spurs continue to struggle. Those are my NBA Tuesday tip-off picks, but let's be honest, this pod is all about celebrating our epic week of picks in week 10. Plus, of course, we try and stay hot with the MACtion picks and other midweek football action. And to do so, Mr. Matt Russell joins me right about now. What a time to be alive. If you're a fan of the DRF Sports Pod, because if you are, then you are cashing bets left and right this weekend in the NFL. I mean, somehow, some way, I looked up at a 12-2 week against the spread, but that's because Matt was convincing me to do certain things here and there, switch the odd pick here and there, but the vibes were just all positive. He was handing out money line parlays, but the big thing, and I mean, because it's fresh off the press, convincing me to have some faith in my Niners, because I did not believe, but this man motivated me to take the San Francisco 49ers because they would win easy versus the Rams. He's not Mike Singletary, but he also wants winners, and this week he got them. Mr. Matt Russell, how you doing, man?
Oh, spectacular, man. Spectacular week, right? We said after week one, we're like, guys, it's not going to get better than this. It's not going to get as good as this. Everybody calm down. And, you know, we go through weeks 2 through 8, 9, and we have just solid little runs there, right? Picking up some units along the way, you know, having a couple good weeks here and there, not having any kind of damage really whatsoever on the season. And you never know when it might turn. Well, it turned back in a good way. It turned back the clock to week 1, and we were awfully close to just winning everything in sight. We basically swept the board against the spread. But as far as the money lines are concerned, right, we'll get into some of these games here, I think, but like, you know, pretty close to just absolute destruction as it was. It is probably never going to get as good as it did this week. So, you know, we're 10 weeks into the season, and week 1 and week 10 were basically sweeps of the board. And if you can just have 2 really good weeks, and I mean really like capitalized, underlined, really good weeks, you can sustain, right, a full season of NFL betting, because it's not going to be consistently awesome. Hopefully it's consistently treading water with a couple of real big bursts. And last night was one of them. And, you know, congratulations to your 49ers. I dragged you kicking and screaming into the abyss, right? Like you're swimming away from Alcatraz, trying to get the 49ers home. But it was just that perfect spot, right? We talk about these things all the time, and it's sort of this nebulous universe of the spot, right? It's like, I always call it like, it's like stuff in baseball. People, oh, you know, how's this pitcher pitch? Well, he has really good stuff. We don't really know what that means, right? And when we talk about the spot in football, this was a perfect spot for San Francisco. We always talk about the embarrassment, right, factor, the embarrassment index, as I'm going to coin. San Francisco was really embarrassed after losing to the second stringers on the Cardinals, right? And they were locked in, they were focused. We talk about matchups, right? Perfect matchup for them, as they often, you know, take care of business against the Rams. 4-0 in the last couple of years, now 5-0, right? You get into that. We talked, you know, it's funny. We talked about this last year, and we sort of have, you know, haven't really got that much into it, but the NFC West cycle, do you remember like the cycle of doom from last year? Yeah. Well, let's see if we can figure this one out, right? It's San Francisco owns LA. LA owns Arizona by and large. That obviously changed a little bit this year.
Yeah.
Arizona owns Seattle, and Seattle by and large owns the Rams over the course, or excuse me, owns San Francisco. Right. Yeah. And it's like they all just go in this circle because they're all 4 really, really good teams. Now, a couple of, you know, slip ups here and there for San Francisco. And I think Seattle's probably on the downside of this, you know, Russell Wilson run. I don't think that's necessarily shocking anybody to say. And obviously the Cardinals are on the up here, but that's just kind of the way it's been for the last few years. Right. And that's just matchups. That's just these teams facing each other like twice a year, obviously, you know, seeing each other all the time, basically, and knowing what they do. And yeah, as much as we've railed on Shanahan, right, like he's got McVay, you know, he's got his number here a little bit at this point in time.
Yeah, the Niners and Rams to me is the biggest reminder that the NFL is about matchups, right? And it's sometimes the records are the records, but you match up well against a certain team and you don't match up well against others. And I mean, back-to-back weeks, we've seen the Rams kind of get run over or punched in the face, for lack of a better term. But overall, though, in terms of what we do on this pod, and I thought I said it enough in terms of explaining to the people what we do on the pod or what we try to do with the picks. And I try to come on here, talk about which way I'm leaning, you know, give the Joe Public take of what the side is, we'll say. And then Matt comes in with the information, education, as I like to call it, on where the line is, where it's going, and where it came from, in hopes of making us all some good picks and some money. So if you've been following along, you've seen at times where I get convinced, like legitimately live as we're recording this, convinced to switch the pick. So what ends up happening here, right? You have a week like last week where everything just goes perfectly. I mean, essentially, if you listen to the pod, right. You saw the things where I was kind of like, really? I'm not really sure about that, but you're just on a heater. There's certain things that went down, though, that even still, I mean, the Washington football team, 29-19 over the Bucks. And the reason I bring this up and I'm starting here is because another big part of the picks being on Fuego is still being alive in Survivor. And the Bucks were a very popular pick for a lot of people in Survivor. And you told us, watch out for Washington. Not that, it's like, oh, they're going to win, but just beware.
Yeah. And it's funny. It's funny because like there are certain plays like the San Francisco one, right, where you have that circled from basically Monday. Like we could have talked about that game last Tuesday, and if we wanted to, right, if that was on the card. And side note, let's take it down a notch on San Francisco, because as great as last night was, the bad news is this coming week. Yeah, we'll just sort of leave it at that for now, right? As crazy as it may sound. As for Washington, there's the picks that you have early on in the week, and you're like, okay, like, this is how I feel about this. And those can sometimes go astray because you get locked into something really early on and you kind of ignore stuff that happens throughout the rest of the week. Washington and Tampa Bay was the opposite for me. That actually, by the time Saturday afternoon rolled around, I had to submit my picks for the Circa Millions contest, the 5 picks against the spread that week. Washington jumped into the top 5 for me. And as of our taping on Friday morning, I was like, okay, well, I would never bet Tampa Bay and like be careful about them from a Survivor standpoint. But it's like I needed that extra like 36 hours to just kind of think to myself, like, man, 9.5, it even went up to 10. 9.5 point home underdog here in a Washington team that you and I talk about. Like, I mean, we talk about every team, so it's not that we specify on the Washington football team, but you and I talk about the Washington
football team podcast.
That's right. That's right. We talk about this team and we go like, yeah, they come so close to scoring all the time. And I think a lot of times we talk about teams in a negative way, right? Like, I think right now I'm in that space with the Titans where it's like, man, the last couple of weeks, like they're kind of pulling it out of their, whatevers. And we don't often talk about the teams that are playing pretty good football, but are just kind of not finishing stuff. And Washington was that team, right? Where it was against the Packers, they don't end up covering that game, but everybody's sitting there going like, I probably should have won that game. And if you are in a space where everybody's kind of thinking you should have won that game, and that game is at Lambeau Field against a really good Packers team that hadn't had all of their sort of, COVID and everything go on with that team, like that's going to be a better team than most people think, right? And of course, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for teams that are worse than people think, and we're looking for teams that are better than people think. And so by the time Saturday rolled around, I was like, God, I think Washington all of a sudden here, because it's been sort of this under the radar game, because both teams were on a bye the week before. So they weren't front of mind as far as like, oh, this matchup, oh, what did they do last week? It's sort of like, 2 weeks in the NFL is like forever, right? So if both teams have their bye, like we almost don't even know what to think of these teams. Like they're just like new all of a sudden because we full on lose our memory of these teams. And so I was just sort of like, Washington's at home in this game. Like, not that they have some great home field advantage, but like Tampa Bay, not very good on the road this season. And, the injuries have piled up all season long. And of course, no Gronk, no Antonio Brown, who were obviously really 2 important guys. And it just became this really important bet for me that on Friday morning, like I only really just kind of had a lingering interest in. And then all of a sudden by Saturday, it was like, yeah, this is a bet that I need to be making and a play that I need to make in contests.
Yeah, for me as well. Like on Sunday morning, I remember it was one of those things before finalizing some picks there. It was kind of like, wait a second, take a step back. What are some of the basic things that I've been mad at myself for, especially if I go back to last week, which was horrible, by the way. So it was a good bounce back. But one of those things was, wait a second, take points. Like I had to pause myself because even when it got to 10, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking Tampa Bay, like that's a lot of points on the road against anybody. And really, do you want to be taking that many points on the road against anybody? We'll save that for, we got a little conversation coming up later on the Jets. We'll get there. But do you know what I mean? So that kind of was the thing. but there are a bunch of other games I do want to touch on, right?
Yeah.
And, the Lions, tell me which game you want to dive into more, and I'm going to kind of rifle through here. But you have the Lions and Steelers who tie at 16, and I think both of them should be handed L's instead of ties. New Orleans covered for us, right, in a game that they very easily could have won. The Eagles as outright winners in Denver in an easy victory, which you did convince me on. And as well, the toughest one to me, which I didn't really see coming. I like the points, but the Vikings with a convincing 27-20 win over the Chargers. All of those games come through for us. But which one do you want to focus on a little more, just in terms of what the read was and how you're looking at that team going forward?
Yeah, well, I mean, I spent like 4 hours of my life watching Lions and Steelers. So, I mean, in theory, I should take that period of time of my life and use that for something going forward. So I suppose in theory, I should talk the most about that. But again, if you experience that 4 hours of sports television, you probably don't need to relive it. No. You mentioned, they both deserve an L. You mentioned Survivor, right? And that's the big sort of, I don't want to say controversy because I think it's a fair, rule, but you tie, you're out in Survivor, right? If you deserve an L, like you get an L. And of course, everybody has their own rules, I suppose, in their home Survivor League. But honestly, you don't win, you should be out, because if you get to the end of the season and you've picked 20 winners or 18 winners and somebody else has picked 17 winners, why should you tie with that person, right? Why should you both get to the end there? So that's my general take on that. Obviously, I was cheering away as somebody who was not on the Steelers. I was hoping the Lions were going to win for the money line and all of that sort of thing. But when it comes to Survivor and the large Survivor contest in Las Vegas that we are in, I was quite content with that being a tie. So, I mean, what else do you say about that game, right? Just two really bad teams and bad conditions. And Dan Campbell takes over the play calling and he said, we're just going to run it every time. And like, honestly, I was fine with it, right? Just stacking up the offensive line. We talked about the O-line being able to neutralize Pittsburgh's defensive line. And that's just kind of how bad the Lions are, that they had just one play to run. It worked. And after it didn't work anymore, after adjustments were made, they just didn't really have anything else other than just kind of guile to stay alive in that game. And of course, I don't even want to get into the kicker in that game because that's going to send me down a dark path. Saints, I think, is a really interesting game for the going forward element because, quickly, I don't really have a ton to say necessarily about the Eagles. Like that was what we thought it was, right? That was very much like the Washington game in Denver, only the Eagles actually converted on their scoring chances, right? So like it didn't really change much for me. And the Vikings are what the Vikings are, right? They are that team that's going to drive you insane because they play these close games, because they blow games that they should win, and they don't really ever get credit for the games that they do win. And, the Chargers are, again, a really good matchup. And we saw Kirk Cousins being able to do work, right? A lot of people went in there thinking like, okay, the Vikings going to be able to run all over the Chargers. Obviously, that's, still was the case. But the key to that game was always going to be Justin Jefferson being able to get loose in that Charger secondary. He had a really big game. So that worked out nicely. But that Saints-Titans game, right? Like, I mean, listen, you and I have done podcasts here for, a year plus now. And we come in on, Mondays or Tuesdays, and we end up just like, we just end up whining, let's say, about officiating and bad breaks and all of that sort of thing. And like, that was his best for the second straight week in a lot of ways. That was the best it could possibly have gotten for the Titans, right? Where you're getting fumbles on kickoffs, 2 extra points getting missed, and just one of the worst roughing the passer calls maybe in history, right? That didn't involve Kyler Murray. And so, you're sitting there going like, well, like what do the Titans have to complain about in this game? Because everything's going, there was even a fumble that like got booted into the defensive side of the field for the Saints. And somehow like AJ Brown came out of nowhere and he recovers a fumble that like 95% of the time, that type of fumble gets recovered by the defense. Like everything is going the Titans' way. And so you can sit there and be like, well, they were up 2 touchdowns. Like they probably should have covered -3, but like, how did they get to that 2 touchdown lead in the first place? Right? Like it's a lot of smoke and mirrors. This is a team that is run game oriented. And it's so funny when Derrick Henry is on the team, nobody wants anything to do with the Titans against a team like the Bills. Cause it's like, well, they're not going to be able to run just with Derrick Henry. And like, he's not going to be able to lead the way entirely. And then they win a couple of games on the strength of Derrick Henry. And everybody sort of steps back and goes like, look at this team. They're great. And then Derrick Henry goes out and you go, okay, again, well, we don't really want anything to do with them. and they win a couple of games, but like, just look at the box score. They're not doing anything on the ground. It is now entirely in Ryan Tannehill's hands. Think about that sentence for a second, right? Entirely in Ryan Tannehill's hands. Like, people still want, to do, they want everything to do with the Titans, right? And hopefully they end up winning this week, because I think we're probably going to be invested in their success this week. But going forward, and maybe that includes this week from a point spread standpoint, like, this is a team that like people are getting a little too high on a little too quickly here. And I think going forward, that's the interesting thing when it comes to all of this cluster of games. And of course, New Orleans, right? Like, steady as she goes, in a good way and in a bad way, or the good is never, too good, and the bad is never too bad here with Trevor Siemian. He's getting just enough done, right? Where he gets that touchdown for us to get us inside the number. And then we immediately, and as much as I was, at the time, and if this was the last game of the week, I'm probably dying for that 2-point conversion to get converted to go to overtime so that we have a shot with the Saints on the money line. But at that point, New Orleans +3 is a contest play for me. It's a spread bet, all of that sort of thing. I'm like, just missed the 2-pointer, man. Let's just get out of here, because I absolutely would have signed up for that, down 2 touchdowns with nothing going right for the Saints. Then the rest of the games go down. You go, man, kind of would have been interesting to see what would have happened if we had gone to overtime. But again, can't complain after an awesome week. So those are my thoughts on those games, and just glad that all of those hit the right side.
Yeah, and a big thing that we also talked about last week on the Friday pod that we went kind of in depth on, and 2 games, was talking about the bounce back, or the embarrassment index that you alluded to earlier. And I asked on the Friday pod, and again, I'm emphasizing this because I want people to understand what we really try to do on the pod. It's less about like, this is the pick, do this, do that. It's more about how you get to your picks, right? Yeah. And that's what we try to talk our way through. And the embarrassment index in terms of the Cowboys and the Bills, both coming off of terrible losses. And I was looking at both games that had big spreads and was kind of wondering, wait, what do we do here in these situations? Are we going to lay these points? Or are we going to take the points with the underdogs? And you're saying, no. Both Cowboys and Bills, you liked laying the points. And exactly how did that play out, my friend?
Right. Like, as speaking of easy as they come, right? Yeah. And fundamentally, and listen, it's never going to be this easy. We have to reiterate that over and over and over again, right? But like, you look at some of these games and it's like big spread games. There's 4, 5, 6 of them this past week. And it kind of just came down to like the teams who were going to cover the big spread are the teams that got embarrassed the week before. Because in a league where, listen, it's just train wreck and car crash over and over again, right? If you want to play, you can't play a football game half-ass, right? Yeah. If you want to play a football game, you got to really want to play a football game, right? And so you need to be focused. And there's so much detail with regards to game plan and reads and knowing what the other team, tendencies are and focus and all of that sort of thing. You got to be locked in during the week. And it's really hard to be locked in for 17, straight weeks, essentially, right? Obviously with one bye week in there. Yeah. And so there's going to be games. There's going to be 2, 3, depending on how good your team is, but there's going to be 2 or 3 games where you just don't have it. And a lot of times those games come in situations where like you're doing pretty well in the season, right? Like we may have seen that last night with the Rams, 7-2, just watched the Cardinals lose the day before. Oh, we're going into our bye week here. Does it really feel like a spot where we're going to be like locked in and studying 24/7? Or, not to throw the 1, 2, 3 Cancun out there, but like, I'm sure somebody had some flights booked after that game. There might be a Hawaiian vacation in there somewhere out on the West Coast, easy flight over the Pacific. I don't know. But in this league, right, like what's the thing that's going to get people's attention, right? It's going to be primetime games when everybody's watching, or it's going to be after you have an embarrassing loss. And there's nothing more embarrassing than a Jags loss, right? Or being down 30 points at home to basically any team, and the Denver Broncos certainly qualify as any team. So Dallas and Buffalo come in and they go, okay, like we got to be on it this week, guys. Like we can't just bleep around here and win games. That was obviously proven by the week before. And so I'm somebody who's loath to lay big points in the NFL or in any sport in general, because I understand, the randomness of it. So I'm looking at like Jags Colts and I'm going like, well, what's the reason for the Colts to blow out the Jags here? right? Because they've had it pretty good here, rested, Jets win in prime time coming off of all of that. And it's like, okay, they can probably just show up and beat the Jags. And they almost let that slip, speaking of Survivor, et cetera, et cetera. So you look at that game, that's 10-pointer. We talked about, Tampa Bay, the same thing. I mean, they had even lost a game going into that bye week. But again, like, how locked in are they, right? Is this the most important game of their season? No, not really. Whereas with Dallas and Buffalo, right? Those are the two that stuck out like a sore thumb, as like, you're going to get their best performance. They probably don't need their best performance to beat those two teams. But what transpired the week before is the thing that's going to lead them to their best performance. And so those were the two situations last week where I was fine laying a big number in an NFL football game, which is not a strategy that I normally take.
Yeah. So as we kind of wrap up our recap of week 10 in the NFL, the overall theme, one of the things we talk about a lot is kind of which team are we looking ahead towards and saying, let's pump the brakes a little, right? In terms of everyone was on them one week, you don't want to be on them the next week, and vice versa. In terms of, oh, wait, this team is trash. What are we doing with them the following week? The zigzag of the NFL, maybe, as we like to call it.
Yeah, we see that, we saw that. We talked about the Titans being that team that, you want to be careful of, right? They might be a little bit overvalued. I mean, the NFL, a little bit overvalued means the line is 3 instead of 2, right? And, or 3 instead of 1, or 3 instead of pick 'em, which we talked about with that Saints and Titans game. And so when the Titans become 3-point favorites in a game, they probably should be 2 or 1.5. Sometimes it comes down to a 2-point conversion. You end up on that right side, right? Sometimes it turns into a thing where, San Francisco should only be 2.5-point underdogs, but they're 3.5 or 4. And it doesn't even come close to mattering because San Francisco wins by 3 touchdowns, right? Like, it can go both ways. It doesn't always necessarily save you, if you will, right? Vikings were that last week as well on the sort of positive side where we wanted to back them. Couple of things here, right? Like, we have this Thursday night game coming. We'll talk about that, I guess, a little bit here. The Falcons are certainly like one of those teams right now where you kind of want to wonder. But I want to ask you, like, we haven't talked about Cleveland and New England as one of the big games from this past week. And the other big game was Seattle and Green Bay. So like, where are you right now? What's the Baker check, right? Like, you're our resident like Baker connoisseur, if you will. What's the Baker check right now going into this next week, or off of that last week? Because it was the classic Baker, right? Where it's like, okay, nobody believes in him, and they come up with this big win at Cincinnati. And then everybody's like, yeah, Browns, like, Super Bowl contenders, like, if they can just play the way they did against Cincinnati. Well, they just never do that back to back, right? Like, they are a classic back and forth type of team. And so, like, where are you right now with Baker and the Cleveland Browns?
He is who we thought he was. We are who we thought we were. You know what I'm saying? My point is, Baker, like, you're exactly right. It's the spot where you're looking at it and thinking, I think I said on the pod on Friday, if you're telling me, am I going to ride with Belichick against Baker? I'm probably going to do that 10 times out of 10, right? Just off principle. But the thing is, and you're seeing just terrible passes from Baker where, it's almost like the conversation we were just having about the spot. Right. Yeah. And so, Odell leaves, you're a little more fired up, just the way that went, because all eyes are on you. So you're a little more, as you said, he's feeling dangerous that morning. Right. Whereas
that's right.
A week later, where everyone's now patting you on the back, like, oh, see, Odell was the problem, blah, blah, blah. Now he relaxes a little. Right. Yeah. And you don't want to relax against Belichick and company.
No.
It's just a bad spot. It's a bad spot. So
he's the something or nothing to prove guy. Yeah, he's the something or nothing to prove. If he has something to prove, you don't want to mess with him, right? Yeah. If he's got nothing to prove, then it's like anything is possible. Like, this guy could totally phone this game. And like, the injuries, are an issue as well, right? So we got to at least mention that. But like, they weren't against Cincinnati, but then they are against New England, et cetera, right? So like, you take everything with a grain of salt.
And you mentioned the Packers, and I feel like with Aaron Rodgers is kind of the same thing. Like, he couldn't really come out and have a horrible game coming off of the week that he just came off of, right? So he's going to be super locked in, and they probably could have won by a lot more points, right? Yeah. Like, if we really, but you add in the weather, you add in all that stuff, and the whole Russell Wilson thing. Like, if I have to hear more about Russell Wilson's rehab coming back and all that trash, like what did he try to say? Heroic. He was working out 17 hours a day or something stupid like that.
Rehab, just constant rehab, just living in a chamber of, hyperbaric chamber.
It's a finger injury, bro. Like, get out of here. What are we talking about? Right? Like,
that's right.
I get it.
Your whole body doesn't need to be submerged in the hyperbaric chamber. Like, just put your hand in there. Like, get a special one. Come on.
Yeah. So overall, it's just kind of the same, right? Where it's like we weren't really buying too much into the Seahawks. We thought the Packers were a solid team, and with Aaron Rodgers back and focused, that's a dude going forward that, you know, they're a top team in the NFC right now. We'll see what happens in the playoffs. But in terms of the regular season, Packers just continuing to roll, right? Business as usual, for lack of a better term. So that's kind of where I'm at with those four teams. And we will talk about New England a little later on when we get to that pick. So I'll save a little bit of that for that convo. So I'm going to keep things moving though, because I want to switch over to the NCAA because speaking of picks, hey, the picks continue to be pretty good in the NCAA as well. The MACtion picks are hitting, hurry up offense. Still, you're profiting from that. But there's some big storylines that I really want to talk about here. And the first things first for me is Georgia. Like, is this even going to be a competition, or should we just like hand them the trophy now? Should we just be dumping all the futures money on Georgia right now? Like, am I missing something here, or is it just
no? I mean, no to all of that, right? Like, with the exception of the fact that like they're a truck, right? Like, but unfortunately, there isn't a ton to do with it right now, right? Like when you mentioned the futures, you know, and that's the thing. Like Georgia's just sitting there, like being awesome. The quarterback's doing, I would say, just enough, but like kind of more than enough, right? Like he's playing quite well, and Stetson Bennett has that like mobility to him, so that, you know, even though like throws don't necessarily look all that great, like they don't even have to try that much when it comes to the passing game, because the run game is so good, and like when things get, you know, kind of hairy for him, he can take off, and he is quote unquote sneaky athletic. You know, you mentioned the hurry up offense, 11-8. We're last week after an 11-8, like we're just churning out just small profits in the hurry up offense, but we're having a great time, right? You bet 19 games on a Saturday, right? Like you're living and dying. And we had some absolute wild ones this past week. We had Arizona State and Washington. I got in on that game a little bit later. If you bet that game, like God help you, like it was a scene and a half. Washington's winning that game comfortably throughout. Arizona comes back to take the lead, but they're still not covering. And then Washington throws the pick six with 30 seconds left. And Arizona State looks like they're going to cover. And then Washington, one of the worst offenses, frankly, I've ever seen, somehow goes down and scores a touchdown to get through the back door, a door that they had already been in and lived in because they had been in the lead for the entire game. That was a wild one. Meanwhile, I'm sweating out. We talked about this. Don't watch this game. Tulsa and Tulane. Don't watch it. Don't watch it. And like, Tulsa's the right side the whole way, and that's bad for us who are on Tulane. But then Tulane has a 26-yarder to win the game at the bell, and the kid misses it. And you just go #college kickers, like, of course, now we got to go to overtime. Obviously, Tulsa scores a touchdown in overtime and wins that by more than the 3 points that we were getting. And all that is fine until you flip over and you see the Texas Tech kicker make a 62-yarder. Like, it wasn't even like 61 where the numbers weren't directly opposite each other, like 26 to 62. Like, I mean, hit a 63 and I would have felt better about it, right? Like, come on, like this whole thing, like what are we even doing out here? So the Georgia, you know, listen, I was on Tennessee. I thought they would be able to at least score a little bit. They scored an actual little bit. We needed just a little bit more, or just, you know, maybe a little bit better defensively. They took a 7-0 lead. Georgia completely unaffected by it. But you mentioned the futures market, and like, unfortunately, no, there isn't anything there. But what is interesting, and it's not necessarily technically a futures market here, is that Circa in Las Vegas has put up a line already for the SEC championship game. And this is a game that you and I have had circled for months, right? And like months ago, we thought maybe it might be a pick 'em. Maybe we might even get Georgia at an underdog price here. Well, they've opened Georgia at -3 in the SEC championship game. And I kind of think that's still a little bit too low. Now you go Nick Saban, you know, you get around to that Saturday and you're going to be thinking like Nick Saban plus points as an underdog on, you know, a neutral site. Like, against Kirby Smart, like I have to take this. But it's just interesting to know that like a couple of weeks in advance here, obviously the Bo injury for Auburn makes that way less likely that they could upset Alabama. So it's really starting to look like this game is actually going to happen. Obviously Auburn took that loss, but I believe that actually clinched for Alabama to make the SEC championship game. But yeah, I still kind of think that might be a little low on the -3 or even the -155 on the money line that they opened it up at. Because for a while here, Georgia has been a -170 to -190 SEC title. In the futures market, they've been the odds on, favorite for that. And so I kind of think we might still be getting a deal here on Georgia because, and I don't think anything that Alabama is going to do here in the next couple of weeks is going to change my mind with regards to Alabama, right? Like they could beat Auburn with Auburn's backup quarterback in there and like, it might look really good. And maybe we get a better price on Georgia because of it, but I'm still, all the way in on Georgia for the SEC. Again, the price for the futures market for the national championship, it's what, like plus 200 at this point. Like, yeah, again, I would like to know the matchups a little bit. There's a very real possibility Alabama is 2-loss and still makes the college football playoff, at which point, right, we're going to see Georgia again as just a 3-point favorite against Alabama and maybe even in a semifinal rematch. So there's a lot of moving pieces here. Again, I think it's kind of unfortunately a 2-horse race between Georgia and Alabama, with Ohio State also kind of bucking their head in there, and I think they're probably obviously very likely to make the college football playoff. We wish there was a fourth team that we could get excited about here. Oregon pulls away from Washington State late. Shout out to our guy, Jaden DeLora, who gets us in the back door for a push with a late touchdown in that game. But we had a little bit more hopes for Washington State as far as that game is concerned. But they're underdogs this week to Utah. And all it takes there is a loss to Utah, and maybe they are out of the conversation. But as you and I have talked about, who is that fourth team, right? Is it going to be Cincinnati because there's just no other options? Or is it going to be potential two-loss Alabama because there just are no other options? We saw Oklahoma dump one at Baylor, right? Yeah. I had higher hopes for that game. You saw that number crash right before game time. I knew I was in trouble there. But Oklahoma gets that first touchdown. You go, okay, like we might have something going here. Caleb Williams going to come halfway through the year here and like win the Heisman Trophy because he played really well against TCU. It was like, look out, like nobody wants the Heisman, come take it. Caleb Williams come through the door, and you and I were just sitting going like, what? Like a half season? We're giving out Heisman trophies for half seasons? Like maybe let the kid play a couple of games before we even think about that. And of course he looks terrible. Spencer Rattler finds his way back into the lineup. So total mess when it comes to Oklahoma here. We'll see how they look in the next couple of weeks here going forward. So just who's left, right? And like, there just kind of isn't anything left. And so I'm not terrified. It's probably not the right word because, to be honest, maybe they are one of the 4 best teams in the country. But like, I think we're headed for some controversy when Alabama gets in as a 2-loss team. Ohio State gets in. And then it's like, how do we keep Cincinnati out? Notre Dame might find their way in somehow, even though they haven't played anybody. Like the whole thing is just an absolute mess at this point because nobody can take care of their business. So we'll see if Oregon can this week at Utah. That would be a really nice win for them. But again, like it is an absolute sweepstakes beyond Georgia at this point. So, Georgia is clearly the favorite, and they rightfully should be.
I don't know how to feel about what you just said about Notre Dame, because on the one hand, I'm tired of seeing Notre Dame just get blown out in the college football playoff. Sure. But at the same time, maybe it's an easy bet to make at them getting blown out in the college football playoff. So I'm not really sure which way to lean there as I listen to you say that. But let's keep things moving here because the MACtion has been really good to us as we talk a little midweek football picks. And we've been sprinkling more picks on the Tuesday pod for sure. 4-0 in the MACtion last week. Let's see
on the last 2 weeks. Yeah. Right. Because basically just picking up a unit a day. It's a Tuesday winner, Wednesday winner, Tuesday winner, Wednesday winner. And we haven't gotten too crazy, right? We haven't gotten because we've just been doing like one game at a time here, but I'm here to tell you, we might get a little crazy this week.
All I'm saying is there's just too many winners for me to even keep track of at this point. So I was just going to say, let's get to this week. And what do you got here for us on Tuesday night?
Okay, so there's a couple of different ways you can go with this. You can go the super conservative way, because we are getting to that point. We are deep into that point with 2 weeks left in the regular season here for college football, right? We have 2 more blow it out Saturdays, right? Like, look out. I don't know. Are we going to have 19 in the hurry up offense for the next 2 weeks? That seems unlikely, but I kind of thought it was unlikely last week, and we did. So all of that is to say that we are getting so far deep into the season that these lines are getting really, really tight, right? We had seen advantage spots here, basically one a night in MACtion, and that's worked out for us. Now, those don't necessarily always work out by any stretch of the imagination. So these lines are getting tighter is the point. So let's look at Toledo at Ohio. And we have had some success with Ohio. And hopefully we can have success with Ohio again. My numbers make this a 6-point spread. Toledo's favored by 7. Okay. So fundamentally you go, okay, we got a little bit of an edge here on the, a side of a key number here. So let's take Ohio plus the 7. Is it a massive edge with just that 1 point? No, not necessarily, but we have, speaking of good vibes, we have some good vibes with Ohio, right? They've got that run game going. They got the dual quarterback situation, Canadian quarterback, not that that's important, but, he's in the mix there in the long history of Rourke, Ohio, Canadian quarterbacks, he and his brother. And so, I'll try Ohio again here. Why not, right? We've been living good in MACtion, so why not? Another one, Western Michigan and Eastern Michigan. Eastern Michigan as a home underdog. Always a good idea in MACtion by and large, right? I have this number. It's a little bit more of a gap, but I have this number at 3.5. It's 5.5. So the good news is we've got 2 points of an edge, but we are not crossing a key number, right? So you see how that's kind of the same thing, right? 1 point crossing a key number, or at least sort of edging off of a key number versus 2 points not on a key number. Basically the same kind of an edge, not a large edge, but if you want to get loose, Eastern Michigan plus 5.5. Seeing a little bit of a theme here. It's called the underdog. Miami of Ohio is 17-point favorites. At home against Bowling Green. Now, Bowling Green is a historical horror show when it comes to the MAC. They are not quite Akron level, but they have been pretty close in years past. We have thought them to be a little bit better this year, especially defensively. They're going to have a little more offense here to keep up with Miami of Ohio. 17 points is a bridge too far for me. I have a larger gap here, but it's a little bit scary. Bowling Green, who knows if they've sort of packed in with regards to this season. So we're going to take Bowling Green plus the 17 points. So again, fundamentally, I wouldn't blame you if you stayed away entirely on Tuesday, but I also have 3 games that I have a small edge on, and maybe we can go 2-1 in those 3 games. Don't think that there's necessarily going to be a sweep. As for Wednesday, things get a little bit tighter. Central Michigan and Ball State. Unfortunately, there's nothing here. I've got Ball State as 2.5-point favorite. They are a 2-point favorite. You can see how tight we are on these lines. When we know this much about the MAC, by the way, that's a horrifying situation, right? When we were this locked in on the MAC, where we are being able to, pinpoint these point spreads on MAC games, arguably the worst conference in Division I FBS college football. Northern Illinois and Buffalo. I made Buffalo a small favorite in this game. Northern Illinois is the small favorite in this game. So again, maybe it's a wrong team favorite type of thing. I mean, I had Buffalo minus 2.5. It's Northern Illinois minus 1.5. So I'm going to try the underdog here as well. This is the one game on Wednesday that I would play. Buffalo plus 1.5. You can maybe even try it on the old money line to see if we can't save ourselves some juice potentially if Northern Illinois goes ahead and actually wins that game.
Okay. I like it. As we get into Thursday action, though, let's stick with the NCAA on Thursday night. Another massive spread is Louisville is favored by 19.5 on the road at Duke.
Yeah. And honestly, I don't have anything for this game, right? 19.5, like you said it right there, 19.5 on the road, right? What am I going to do here? Yeah, right. I'm going to lay 3 touchdowns with Louisville. They probably win this game 45-0. We've been on the wrong side with Duke a couple of times and we're just never going to do that again. So I'm not even going to take the 19.5 points at home, right? At gunpoint, I suppose I would, but I'm not even sure that's the case. I think I still might lay the 19.5 with Louisville if I absolutely had to, right? Duke, every time we think Duke is playing a team with a bad defense, they still don't score. Right? They have put in some of the worst efforts possible here. So yeah, that's why this game's 19.5 on the road for a Louisville team that's just okay and has somewhat of an explosive offense with Malik Cunningham, et cetera, et cetera. So total pass for me in that game.
I like it. And before we get to the other Thursday nighter in the NFL, I just want to give a quick reminder to check out the DRF Sports Sunday Scoop e-newsletter. So if you haven't done so already, make sure you sign up for free at drf.com/sports to receive 2 free weekly newsletters delivered to your email inbox every Friday and Sunday. Both are packed with powerful betting angles you don't want to miss. So make sure you sign up for the Sunday Scoop e-newsletter and check out Scott Gramling's weekly 6-pack, plus his in-depth game previews. drfs.com/sports. We've got you covered however you need your betting information. But as mentioned, Thursday night football, we got the Falcons in 6.5-point underdogs to the Red Hot Patriots. And I feel as if this line is sitting here for the entire world to get hyped up on the Mac Jones train and take the Patriots as less than a touchdown, because we just saw the Falcons get dumped in against the Cowboys. And yet I'm sitting here liking the points, because 6.5 on the road for the Pats is a little too much for me on a short week, but that's just me. Where are you on this one?
Yeah. And I tell you, if you like the Falcons here, just wait, right? We're going to 7. We're going 7 in this game, right? Like, we're cooking along here. This thing was 4.5, 5, and it's just like a train, a locomotive down the tracks, right? And we find out Cordarrelle Patterson is out, and like that, if there was ever a safety blanket for Matt Ryan, like that is the case. But when you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, like, yeah, there's no way that, Patriots can lose this game. Like, just think to last Thursday, right? Like, we all agreed there was no way the Ravens were going to lose to the Dolphins. And, they did. And then the Ravens are probably a better team than the Patriots are. And the Falcons are probably about as good of a team as the Dolphins are, right? So, like, don't think that this is some automatic thing. Obviously, we might find ourselves in that same spot that we were last week, where we go, yes, a pretty good teaser leg. Right? -6.5 right now before it gets to 7, tease that down to a half. Now all you just need to do is have the Patriots win. Like, that looks pretty tasty, right? Like, and I'm not saying that in like, don't do it, like, beware. I'm saying like, I kind of like it. Right?
Yeah.
Like, right? Like, it's not like the Falcons at home or some juggernaut. But again, this is how we get ourselves into trouble, right? So certainly looks like a teaser leg that you can, again, use to start building your portfolio, your teaser portfolio for the weekend. I say that all is to say, didn't work last week, so be careful, right? Like, don't consider these things a lock. Just understand that that's probably the better way to play the Patriots. It was the better way to play the Ravens last week, right? Again, didn't necessarily work, but it was the better strategy and will work over the long term. So yeah, if you want to bet the Falcons, totally understand that. That's probably the quote unquote right side. My numbers make this like a 5-point spread. That's with the adjustment down for the Falcons with Cordarrelle Patterson being out for this game. And obviously, we're not expecting Ridley back necessarily anytime soon here. And listen, I'm not a totals guy. Everybody knows that. If you've been, with me here for the couple of years that I've been doing this, it's just usually a train wreck when I start talking about totals. All of that is to say, kind of like the under in this game, right? Like, feels like a conservative game plan for both offenses. It feels like, classic Patriots, like, let's just get out of there with a 20-3 type of a win. Like, at least in their minds, they think they can probably pull that off. So the under kind of feels interesting here. I think it's 47 right now, the last time I looked, which does feel a little bit high for a game where if neither team got into the 20s, like, I wouldn't be all that shocked. I would certainly be a lot more surprised if the Falcons did. So this probably is like a 24-17 type of Patriots win, and 17 might be even a little bit high for the Falcons. And to be honest with you, 24 might be a little bit high on a short week for the Patriots.
Let's switch gears a little here to some NCAA hoops.
Yeah.
And, I know you're fired up. I know you love the college basketball, and we're here. You mentioned a late night UCLA game, which I thought was hilarious. How did that one go for you?
Well, I hit the PVR, pounded that PVR for that 11:30 Eastern Standard Time top 5 matchup, because if you're looking to get people's attention on UCLA basketball, not that, the Final Four run didn't get people's attention last year, but you're going to schedule this top 5 game. Villanova, great team. UCLA, great team this year. Everybody's back from last year and then some. And let's fired up at 8:30 local time so that nobody, listen, in my younger years, which were not that long ago, I promise, I absolutely would have stayed up, and I would have loved the fact that at 2 a.m. I was watching an electric overtime game at Pauley Pavilion on TV. Fortunately for us, I was able to make that bet. I talked about it at -4.5. It dropped to 3. And that was probably the right move, given the fact that this went to overtime. If I was on the underdog, I would say, we went to overtime and we had +4.5. And I would absolutely complain about that. Good news is I had -3. It goes to overtime, becomes a lot more palatable to cover. They end up covering both of those numbers. So even if you got -4.5, you ended up winning that game as well. And that's after our 1-1 split in the Champions Classic. So we are 2-1, a robust 66% through 3 games this season, in a season where we will probably have 500 bets, but 2-1, here we are. 3 games on Tuesday. So you're sitting there, you're going, you know what? I don't know about those 3 games in MACtion. Do I really want to get involved in those? No, not really. How about I spice things up in my life with a little college basketball on a Tuesday night? We have 3 actually pretty interesting games. One of them, of course, starts incredibly late, but again, hammer the PVR, watch it in the morning. That's what I did on Saturday. Nice early winner on Saturday when I'm watching that UCLA Villanova game. Virginia +8.5 at Houston. Virginia has already lost to Navy this year. That's obviously affected this line, I think, here with a Houston team that has lost a couple of pieces from that team that I believe was Elite 8 or at least Sweet 16 last year. I'm going to take those 8.5 points with Virginia, right? Like they're going to try to drag, how Virginia plays. They're going to try to drag you in to a 45-42 type game where 4 possessions feels like a million possessions, right? And so the idea that Houston's going to win this game by 5 possessions seems a little bit unlikely to me here. So I think Virginia, backing them after that loss to Navy last week is probably the right side in this game. Seton Hall and Michigan. I'm loath to lay points. You know how I work here. But Michigan is ready, right? Like this is a fully formed team from last year. They have everybody back by and large. -9 seems like a lot of points until it's a 15-point second half lead with Michigan, and they're just grinding you to pieces on both the offensive and defensive side. So give me Michigan -9 tonight against Seton Hall, a team that will probably get a little bit better over the course of this season. Speaking of teams that get better over the course of a season, that's Oregon. You know me, man, like I'm always in on the Dana Altman train, right? College basketball is fun because you might not have a favorite team, right? But you sort of have a favorite coach or a favorite style or just sort of a favorite, year-to-year narrative that you can rely on. And Oregon is always that team in February and then in March, right? Where they are often, their resume doesn't look amazing. They're often underdogs to quote unquote better teams, and they often beat those teams. The thing is, it doesn't always necessarily work out that way at the start of the season. And so Oregon's giving 4 points here to BYU. And speaking of fully formed teams, Mark Pope's team is a bit more fully formed here than Dana Altman's team. So I think Dana Altman's team is going to be better in the long run. But I think that they are up against it here at home against BYU. So give me BYU plus the 4 points here in a game that, again, feels like the line should be a little bit lower than it actually is, or excuse me, should be higher than it actually is. So we're actually going to take BYU here. I think there's a real strong chance they get this upset against Oregon. But don't worry, Ducks fans. Are we huge in Oregon? I don't know. I think we're only huge in Iowa at this point. The Ducks are going to be just fine. I just don't necessarily love them tonight. So BYU +4.
All right. I mean, what more do you want from this podcast? We started off with some NBA picks. We close out with some NCAA basketball picks. Mix in a celebration of a great weekend of picks in both the NFL and NCAA. We got you covered here. But if people want more info from you, Matt, where can they find you online?
Yeah, at MRUS Authentic on Twitter is where everything's kind of coming through, right? And you mentioned the celebrating. There is sometimes when we don't go perfect through the weekend where we will commiserate, right? And that's part of the quote unquote fun as well. That is, if we're going to lose money on occasion, we want to at least get the best out of it, right? And that sometimes is the commiserating element. So that part is very much there. The celebrating part, we try to dial it down because we know the gambling gods are listening, right? We know that the bad beats are always around the corner, right? Whether it's 26-yard field goal or something else. You never want to anger what's going on out there in the universe. But over at MRUS Authentic, everything that I do over at The Score gets tweeted out through there. So you're always on top of things when it comes to teasers, moneyline parlays, my ratings, all of that sort of thing. As we get into other sports here, it's going to be a lot more action here. You and I are both exhausted. At MRUS Authentic on Twitter is where you can find all that fun stuff.
Great times as always, my dude. And hopefully the next time we talk, well, no, We'll be celebrating some MACtion wins, we hope, some basketball wins, we hope, and have some great picks lined up for week 11 of the NFL season. Matt, thanks again for joining me here on the pod, for tuning in.
Happy to do it. And listen, even if I wasn't on the podcast, I would absolutely tune in. And honestly, if you haven't rated or reviewed this guy's podcast right now, everybody who's listening to this, why are you being such a freeloader? Let's just be honest about some things here, right? Like give the man a rating, give the man a little bit of a review here, because we're making you money. We're doing it for free. You know, that's the least you could do. It's literally the least you could do. So hit him up. But thanks as always, brother.
Thanks to Matt for coming on the pod. And if you want to follow me online, you can do so on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander and on Twitter at Shell Alexander. Like and subscribe to the DRF Sports Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget, for your chance to get some free DRF swag, head over to our home on Instagram at DRF Sports and enter by liking the giveaway post, following DRF Sports on Instagram, and sharing the post on your story. Again, the winner will be announced on Wednesday, November 17th. That's how you get some free swag. And for more from DRF Sports, because this is our brand new project, in case you're not familiar with the letters DRF, Daily Racing Forum has been around for over 100 years, giving you all of the horse racing information, data, and analysis. But now we're taking over the entire sports world. So if you want coverage on every football game, as well as the NBA, NCAA, and more, head over to drf.com/sports for all of the details and insights, as the site has all of the data on every game, including offensive and defensive stats, betting angles, line movements, key injuries, and more. The DRF data is what powers our power trends. So if you want to see which trends our analysts have selected, follow us on Instagram and on Twitter. If you want access to all of the raw data, go to drf.com/sports. That's where the usual previews are. Plus, we go in depth on this podcast. Basically, however you want your betting information, we've got you covered. That's all I got for now. My name is Sheldon Alexander, and remember to tune in to this podcast every Tuesday and Friday. Like and subscribe, tell your friends, bless us with a like, rate us, review us, all that other fun stuff. And until next time, see ya.
Thanks for listening to the DRF Sports Podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show. For more sports betting advice, go to drf.com/sports and follow on Twitter at DRF_sports.